Hello, everyone. I want to take this time to welcome you all back to God Sees Me. This is the third episode. So let's jump right in. I began making up stories or lying about myself to make myself look good in other people's eyes who didn't live with us, didn't have intimate details of my family life. I was making myself out to be better than I actually was. Always in trouble because I would tell a lie and then forget what I had said. Constantly caught up in he said, she said, just running my mouth. I was learning not to talk so much, but the lies continued, and I never stopped looking for love. And I found it in all the wrong places. I became every boy's girlfriend and nobody's girlfriend all at the same time. I didn't know what love was supposed to feel or look like. I equated love with sex. I was developing quickly and getting a lot of attention that wasn't good. Around this time is when the sexual molestation started. Yeah, I was sneaking around doing things I had no business doing at my age. But here comes this grown man, my mother's boyfriend, telling me that it doesn't hurt my mother, so it's not going to hurt me. She's not going to believe you anyway. The problem I caused for myself. The girl who cried wolf. I knew this wasn't right, and I would fight this man, fight him until he gave up. But he never stopped trying. Anytime he was drinking, I knew the bullseye was on my back. No protection. Who was I going to tell? I was to blame for everything that was happening to me. All that humiliation and shame. I carried it with me everywhere I went, bottled up inside. No voice. Stuck. Just stuck. How do you progress in life carrying around a suitcase full of garbage? I was listening to a preacher who was talking about the principles of progress. He said that stuck should be a season, not a state or a cycle. He said that if we are in a state or a cycle of being stuck, there is a principle that is being ignored or not being applied correctly in our life. For that, we need some wisdom. And wisdom is knowing how to rightly apply the knowledge that we have. Scriptures are our blueprint for how to get better. He took us to Hebrews chapter 9, verses 1 through 4. And the NIV says this. Now, the first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. And verse 2, a tabernacle was set up. In its first room was a lampstand and the table with its consecrated bread. In the King James Version, it's candlestick and showbread. And this was called the holy place. Verse 3, behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place. 4, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered ark of the covenant. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. So, he went on to say that the Ark of the Covenant represents God's presence. That's the first principle of progress, the principle of presence, the Ark of the Covenant. This is where we should always be, in God's presence. You might not know this, but God's presence is password protected. Psalm 100 and verse 2 in the King James Version says, "Come before his presence with singing." Verse 4 says, "Enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him and bless his name." Singing, thanksgiving, and praise are the passwords that will get us into God's presence. Passwords are designed to keep the wrong people from gaining access to something important, something personal, or in this instance, something sacred and holy. These passwords allow us access to the presence of God. Just because you are in the building, the church, doesn't mean you are in God's presence. Pastor Black, my pastor at the Beulah Missionary Baptist Church in Decatur, Georgia, always makes it a point to ask, what did you bring to God this morning? Are you entering into his presence, or are you just occupying the space on a pew? A person who gives access to anyone indiscriminately, without careful choice or planning, is someone with an identity issue, or someone who doesn't know their own worth or value, or someone without standards. I gave access to everyone because I didn't know who I was or what I wouldn't stand for. I accepted whatever behavior, whatever treatment from anybody because I thought I was worthless and I got what I deserved. Ask yourself, who have you given access to that didn't deserve it? You'll be surprised. The preacher then talked about the benefits of being in God's presence. He compared the first benefit to the manna. And so we know God rained down manna daily for the Israelites when they were in the wilderness. They were instructed to only gather what they needed for the day because the manna decayed. It didn't last. They couldn't store and use it the next day. The only time they were to collect a double portion was the day before the Sabbath, because we know on the Sabbath was the day of rest, the holy day. That was the only time the manna didn't spoil. Now, since we know that the manna spoiled overnight or couldn't be saved, why wasn't it spoiling in the ark? Because it was in the presence of God and he was sustaining it. And God sustains us. That is the first benefit of being in his presence. He sustains us. God won't let us decay in our sin unless that is where we choose to be. So let's talk about Aaron's staff. Numbers chapter 17 verses 1 through 9 in the New International Version says this. 1. The Lord said to Moses, 2. Speak to the Israelites and get 12 staffs, one from the leader of each of their ancestral tribes. Write the name of each man on his staff. Verse 3. On the staff of Levi, write Aaron's name, for there must be one staff for the head of each ancestral tribe. 4. Place them in the tent of meeting in front of the Ark of the Covenant law, where I meet with you. Verse 5. The staff belonging to the man I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of this constant grumbling against you by the Israelites. 6. So Moses spoke to the Israelites and their leaders, gave him 12 staffs, one for the leader of each of their ancestral tribes. And Aaron's staff was among them. Verse 7. Moses placed the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the covenant law. Verse 8. The next day, Moses entered the tent and saw that Aaron's staff, which represented the tribe of Levi, had not only sprouted, but had budded, blossomed, and produced almonds. Verse 9. Then Moses brought out all the staffs from the Lord's presence to all the Israelites. They looked at them, and each of the leaders took his own staff. Now, this was done because the Israelites were complaining against Moses and Aaron. People will have a problem with your positioning. The second benefit of being in God's presence, where he places you and or what he uses you for. The third item in the Ark of the Covenant was the stone tablets. These tablets contained the 10 Commandments, which are the laws God gave us as direction on how to live our lives. Here are some of the benefits. They help us live a righteous and faithful life. They help us understand how to serve God and how to live with others. They also help us to be open to the Holy Spirit's grace. I pray that you would take this information and study it for yourself. I also learned that being in the presence of God reveals truth to you and about you. A lot of times, the truth about us is not what we want to hear. But Jesus says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." That comes from John chapter 8, verse 32 in the King James Version. Free from what, you ask? Free from shame, free from guilt, free from humiliation. How about free from sin and free from fear? Being able to accept the truths about myself is what has enabled me to share my life with you and the experiences that I've been through. Ask God to show you. Then ask him to help you deal with. And then thank him for allowing you to receive and accept your truths. They might hurt. They will hurt. And you might not like what you learn about yourself. You won't like it. But you need to know it's the only way to progress in your journey. I'm so glad that I was able to share with you what I learned about getting into God's presence. So, back to my life. I'm in my first year of high school and I have a boyfriend. I loved him and I just knew I had someone that loved me. And guess what? I wound up pregnant. Now I'm scared to death because I had a real fear of my mother. Pregnant at 15? For real? I knew what the consequences were going to be. I think you do too. A beating. I told my boyfriend, but not my mother. All I knew was I wanted this baby because that would be someone I could be sure would love me. My mother suspected something because I was throwing up every morning. During this time, my grandmother, my mom's mother, was visiting New York from North Carolina, staying with my aunt, which is my mom's sister. So we went to go visit, and she looked at me and said to my mother, "Mary, that girl is pregnant. Did she smell it or something?" After we got home, my mother asked me if I had gone through my cycle that month, and fear drove me to answer, yes. The girl who cried wolf couldn't be believed, so she made an appointment with the doctor to have a pregnancy test done. A few days later, the doctor called with the results, and I answered the phone because my mother was at work, thank God. The results were positive, which I already knew. Well, when my mother asked if the doctor called, I said yes, the results were negative. The girl who cried wolf had struck again. Well, she waited until I went to school the next day and called the doctor's office. And she got the real results. When I came home from school that day, she was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for me. I was greeted with, "Come here, heifer." She made me call my boyfriend to come over just to tell him to never speak to me again. Once again, I was told that I was not going to embarrass her by having a baby at the age of 15. So she made arrangements for me to have an abortion. The one person that I was certain of receiving love from was taken away. Unloved again. I read something that asked the question, is God really involved in the details of our lives? It's easy to believe that God is in the good things, our successes, our good relationships, our good health. But we might wonder if He's also in our failures, our broken relationships, and our sicknesses. The good news is, yes, He is. Just know that God being in everything doesn't mean that He is causing everything that happens. We live in a world full of brokenness and sin. There's always trouble. God doesn't create every circumstance, but He does allow them. He is weaving the good parts and the difficult parts together for our long-term benefit and His glory. Nothing we are dealing with has slipped by our sovereign God. He sees everything. All things are under His control. When we choose to trust His ultimate goodness, we can receive the joys of today with thanksgiving and accept the hardships with peace. That means step aside. Get out of His way. God is always working for the good of those who love Him. Tamala Mann sings a song titled, "Step Aside." Here are the words. Hold on. Don't give up. Don't you worry. You don't have to cry. God sees you. He sees what you're going through. Oh, yes, He does. God is willing and he's able. This didn't catch him by surprise. So if you would just trust him and step aside. Be still. Don't question it. For these obstacles, they were allowed. He wants to take you higher. Higher if you hold on. God is willing and he's able. This didn't catch him by surprise. So if we would trust him and step aside. He is faithful. My God is faithful to do what he said he would do. And if he said it, I believe it. There is nothing he can't do. If you stand on his word, cast your cares on him, for he knows and he loves you. He did it for me, and I thank him. If you would step aside, get out of his way, my God will fix it for you. Lean on him. Cast your cares on him. Lean not to your own understanding. My God will work it out. Step aside. My God will do it. Hold on. He's so faithful. He'll never leave or forsake you. You're not in this thing alone. Step aside. Lean on Jesus. He cares. He cares for you. Lord, I'll get out of your way because I know you're able. If I just step aside. So I'd like to go back to what I was discussing about giving access to everyone. I stated that when we give access to anyone, it is probably because we have an identity issue. That was me. We don't know our own value or worth. That was me. Or we have no standards. And that was also me. If I didn't know who I was, how was I supposed to know what to stand for or what not to put up with? Standards. There's an old saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I fell for everything. I didn't believe that I deserved any better than what I got. I got just what I deserved. So, after my mother made me terminate the pregnancy, she told me that I shouldn't tie myself to just one boy. The young man that was my boyfriend had moved on with his life. I assumed he was respecting my mother's wishes and not speaking to me anymore. But that didn't stop the feeling of rejection. Now I have multiple boys calling, wanting to spend time with me for obvious reasons. My mother now starts calling me fast tail. And not those exact words, if you know what I'm saying. I was doing exactly what she told me to do. I started staying out past curfew and dragging my younger friend with me because that was the only way my mother would let me go out, thinking that if I had someone with me, I would keep my curfew and be home on time. But guess what? I got her in trouble right along with me. I was in my rebellious stage at this point. I was looking for love and always on punishment after getting a beating. And I can't say I got whoopings. I got beatings with whatever she could get her hands on. a belt, a slipper, and she wore these slides that had a little wooden heel, and I don't have to tell you which end of the slipper she used. She used the broomstick, which would usually break and leave knots on my elbows because I would try to block the blows. Extension cords, wire hangers, and eventually her fists. I was convinced that no one, even my mother, loved me. How could you just beat me like this? Just beat me. At the age of 16, we had to move because of a fire in our building. It was then that I met an older guy. He was 22 at the time with a son. And my mother asked, what did a grown man with a son want with a 16-year-old girl? My brain was screaming, what does your grown behind boyfriend want with a young girl? Of course, I couldn't say it. Not out loud. The attempts at abuse had stopped by this time because I was old enough to maneuver my way out of situations that would have left me alone with him. My mother made her dislike about the older guy very obvious, which only made my interest in him more evident. So we started a relationship, and I had myself a man, not a boyfriend. I was still going to school, but not attending classes. The lunchroom was my hangout spot. It didn't matter anymore because my dream of going to college was out the window. My man wasn't working, so he was always home, which should have been a red flag for me. A few months into the relationship, my mom decided that we were moving in with her boyfriend and his daughters. Yes, the same man who had been molesting me. I had nowhere to go except with my mother. I want to switch lanes because I need to give myself a chance to recoup from some of this stuff. So, in the last episode, I spoke on deception being the devil's weapon of destruction, and that he can't just overcome us. Genesis 3:1 in the King James Version says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. I found a few definitions for the word subtle. Britannica gives these definitions: clever and indirect, not showing your real purpose. The Collins English Dictionary says, delicately suggestive. I also looked up synonyms for the word subtle: devious, crooked, slippery, shady, scheming, dishonest, and my favorite one, sly. Satan can't force us to do anything. He can only convince or deceive us. He preys on our weaknesses and uses them to keep us from being in God's presence and or getting what God has for us. That's where he had me, believing the most horrible things about myself. When we leave ourselves open, the devil steps right in. John 10:10 in the New International Version says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Satan was never given power by God to oppress man or to rule this earth. God gave us, man, dominion, and authority over this earth. But we yielded that power when we gave in to sin. Luke 19:10 in the New International Version says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Jesus came to save the life that was lost, the life God intended for us from the beginning. We go off on our own path and away from the life that God has for us. Well, that's it for this episode. I'd like to take this time to shout out Honeybee's Hair Care for the great care she takes with me and my hair. She always leaves me satisfied. Honeybees is located at 567 Garden Walk Boulevard in Atlanta, Georgia. The phone number is 404-429-2845. Reach out. You won't be disappointed. You could tell her Angie sent you. I'd also like to shout out the Perfect Arch, located at 1985 McDonough Road in Hampton, Georgia, for all your permanent makeup needs. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like the videos, comment on the videos, input any questions or concerns that you might have. I also have an email, godseesme63@gmail. I also have a Cash App for those of you who find it in your heart to support this ministry. It is God Sees Me 63. I also have a Facebook page, God Sees Me. You can reach me on any one of those platforms with any comments, questions, or concerns. I will respond to each and every one of you. I thank you so much for spending this time with me. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. And remember, God sees you, and I love you. Bye now.